Well, things are certainly heating up and continuing to endure in the war in Israel. And here to help us better understand the latest news from Israel is our friend. He's professor of international studies at Cedarville University, Dr. Glenn Deurr. Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
All right. So I heard this question yesterday, and it might be basic, but it's important. Somebody might go, wait, Hezbollah? I thought Hamas was fighting Israel. What's the difference between Hezbollah and Hamas?
They're both anti-Israel, and they're both backed by Iran, but one is Sunni, that is Hamas, and the other is Shia, that is Hezbollah, and they're also in different geographic locations. Hamas is generally in the Gaza Strip. They're elsewhere as well, but generally in the Gaza Strip, in the very, very southwest of Israel, whereas Hezbollah has its largest base in the south of Lebanon, that is the country to the north of Israel. And so it's worth noting that this is a war on two fronts. And to put it in broad perspective as well, Israel's about the size of New Jersey. It's not a large area by any means. And so a war to its southwest that it's been fighting since October 7th, and then one in the north that unfortunately has been intensifying recently.
To what extent could one consider Hamas and Hezbollah terrorist organizations?
Both are designated as terrorist organizations by the United States and a range of other countries around the world. And so that label is apt. But if we stop there, then we're not really digging deep enough, because both Hamas and Hezbollah form governing institutions in their respective locations, and they end up providing a lot of social services. So think, to some extent, funding hospitals and schools, think dental care, think a range of different areas. They're still a terrorist organization because they commit acts of terror. They have amassed large numbers of weapons to attack Israel, but it's certainly a broader picture than that. And so Iran is the backer, and it really it funds a motley crew of terrorist organizations. Hamas and Hezbollah are the two best known. But there is also Ansar Allah, that is the Houthis in Yemen that periodically fire rockets at Israel, as well as a range of different militia groups in both Syria and Iraq that occasionally attack our troops and allied troops in those countries as well, particularly Iraq. And so Iran funds a lot of terrorist organizations, but it is noteworthy that they do more than that. It's one of the reasons why there is some level of public support on the ground for them, respectively.
And again, these two organizations, Hezbollah and Hamas, you mentioned one is Shia, one is Sunni. For those who don't know, again, those are the two major branches of Islam. Now, those two branches don't normally get along, right? So are they coordinating in their efforts against Israel here?
It's hard to know for sure, because unless Iran gives us more information, we really cannot say for certain. But what we can say is that Iran is funding both because they push back and hit hard against Israel, which is their stated goal. I think Iran has a lot more control over Hezbollah in particular, given the Shia linkages and given the ability to get to Beirut a lot easier and quicker than it is to get into Gaza. But at the same time, there's a clear pathway of terrorism, and they're clearly working together in a coordinated fashion to try and bring down Israel in a very brutal and heinous campaign.
And now, as we look at this, it seems obvious that Iran is funding Hezbollah, as you say. I mean, everybody knows this is the case. What's keeping Iran from going, okay, we're going to stop pretending, we're going to directly attack Israel?
Iran is probably weaker than we realize. It's a country that is very large, around 90 million people, but it struggled economically. It really struggled with sanctions by the United States under the Trump administration. The Biden administration lifted them to some degree, so it's changed the calculus on some level, but it's still a relatively poor country. And so in those types of situations, do you provide services to your people, or do you provide weaponry for conflict elsewhere? But the other issue is that Iran is probably very internally weak. Roughly 2/3 of the Iranian population are ethnically and linguistically Persian, meaning there's a very, very sizable minorities that ring the periphery of the country. But there are many, many people that have significantly disenfranchised from the Shia Islamist regime. Recent media reports from missionary organizations suggest that upwards of 1 million people in Tehran and the outskirt areas, 1 million Iranians have come to know Christ as Savior. And so that's very telling in a country where it's A, closed very heavily, and B, changing one's religion from Islam to Christianity is punishable very significantly. And so it does say that there's a lot of internal turmoil within Iran and a very difficult time just controlling its population. I think back as well to the brutal death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish woman that was killed by the quote-unquote morality police because she wasn't wearing her head covering properly. And that sparked a massive outcry and protest across Iran, where over 300 people were killed, again, by the morality police and Iranian forces. And so there's a weakness, and maybe they're attacking Israel to try and say, hey, there's something else going on in the world. Look at that. Don't look at your internal problems, your inflation, your electric and your heating prices, your food prices, things of that nature. They're trying to just show them something else other than the bad governance internally.
So then help us understand why Iranian-backed Hezbollah entered this conflict with Israel when it was at first just Israel and Hamas.
If we go back to 2006, Israel and Hezbollah had a fairly significant skirmish/war that lasted for 34 days and consisted of significant exchange of rockets and missiles. For those interested, Lebanon is a country of about 5.5 million people, and it is the Old Testament region of Tyre. I think King Hiram with King Solomon in 1 Kings as a good reference point. But Hezbollah has been amassing weaponry, especially higher tech rockets and missiles, since 2006. And I regularly lecture on Israel, and I'll tell my students, okay, Hezbollah has now an estimated 60,000 rockets and missiles. Now it's 90,000. Now it's 100,000. Now it's 120,000. Most recent statistic is 150,000.
Wow.
And the question I pose to my students is, why do they keep amassing this type of weaponry, again, in a relatively poor country? What are they doing? And so when Hamas engaged in that just brutal invasion of Israel in October, I thought, okay, maybe Hezbollah is going to get involved earlier. But I think the reason they didn't is because they remember the scars of 2006. They remember that Israel will hit hard and the death toll will be much, much higher, as we've seen in Gaza and as we've seen in the last few days in southern Lebanon in particular. And so I think they were trying to, for the most part, stay out of things. But I think Iran has orchestrated, yes, you need to use some of this weaponry now that we've been shipping you for well over almost two decades, and we want you to support Hamas in this. And Israel, I think, has gotten to the point where it's been just a slow drip of attacks into northern Israel, sometimes low-tech mortars, but often some of the rockets as well. And I've had the privilege of going along that border by car. And the unfortunate thing for Israel is that the Lebanese have the high ground. They can fairly easily shoot into Israel from that location. And so I think Israel's just gotten to the point where it's done a lot in Gaza to shore up the territory, and now it's sick and tired of just receiving rockets and mortars in particular. And so it's now hitting back very, very hard. And it does threaten to intensify a difficult conflict, but I think there's a demand from Israelis in the north of their country for greater protection and for the firing to stop.
Talking about increasing conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, Hezbollah being to their north in Lebanon. Now, I can't miss the opportunity to ask you to help us understand the pager attack. It sounded like when I first heard it, I was like, that's made up. No, it's not made up. So what happened?
Yeah, I think call for some help from Ron Eastwood. He's very techy and certainly has
He may still carry a pager as that.
some some really great tips in terms of that. But there's a Taiwanese company called Gold Apollo that shipped pagers to Hezbollah, and they've also been using walkie-talkies. And the immediate thought is, well, hold on, isn't this still the 2020s? Why are we going back to the 20th century? What's happening with this? But Israel's intelligence, especially external intelligence, Mossad, as well as its special forces, Sayeret Matkal, have been among the world's very, very best in terms of infiltrating, conducting special operations in places like Lebanon and Syria and probably into Iran. A lot of it's classified, but if you just kind of read between the lines, you can see, okay, this is what they're probably doing. And there have been reports about how Israel has been able to infiltrate and provide surveillance in terms of modern technology, cell phones, emails, things of that nature. And it's been disrupting Hezbollah in significant ways. And so leadership said, okay, we're going to go low tech here. We're going to go pagers and we're going to go walkie-talkies. And it's going to make it a lot more difficult for Israel to infiltrate and provide surveillance. But
Wrong.
somewhere along the line, Israel managed to intercept the shipment, pack explosives, miniature explosives into these pagers, and then they were detonated simultaneously, really causing chaos in Lebanon and targeting leadership within Hezbollah, and even some of these pagers have gone off in Iran, reportedly. So this is a major intelligence coup for Israel, and a warning really to any of its enemies to be very, very careful, because they have means to accomplish their ends that are just very, very creative.
Now, of course, the loss of human life is tragic, but I still, if you set that aside for a moment, I marvel at that particular endeavor on their part. The patience it took, the secretive nature of this, the inventive, it's wild. I've never heard of anything like this. Is this pretty unique, do you think?
As far as I've seen, it's very unique on this kind of scale. You see these types of things, poisonings, assassinations
Right.
of different spies or things like that. But it's usually one or two. To have it this widespread, I can't think of really anything like it. It really is incredible, the
And it worked,
imagination
right?
and the scope. Exactly. Exactly.
So now, okay, if we bring back in the morality of it, even the ethics of this, I've heard discussions about whether or not that strategy of detonating pagers violates the rules of war in some way. Did Israel commit a war crime of some sort in doing this?
It's a difficult question. My gut reaction is no, because those carrying the pages are directly involved in conflict. And we've also seen in the last decade/2 decades the rise of hybrid warfare, or gray zone warfare as it's also known, wherein these types of techniques are considered part of regular conflict as long as they're not targeting civilians. The challenge with it is when a pager goes off and it detonates in a supermarket or in a public area, and then there's collateral damage. That's a euphemism for, people, sometimes kids, get injured and even killed in these types of situations. And so it's very, very difficult, because Hezbollah operates a lot like Hamas in the sense that they put their operation centers, they put their weaponry in a lot of civilian centers, sometimes daycares, schools, hospitals. They use a lot of the same tactics, and so on the surface it can look like a crime against humanity, because look, a hospital has been hit on one side, but there's also often a lot of weaponry there. A number of videos have come out even this morning of Israel attacking positions in southern Lebanon, and then the explosions continue. for usually a minute or two, meaning there are often rockets in that location. And so it gets really difficult when it's a housing complex as well and kids are sleeping. That's where this definition gets really, really challenging in the modern era.
Well, right, because wouldn't it violate the rules of war for Hezbollah to be setting up military installations in civilian areas and like under
Exactly.
hospitals and such?
Exactly. And so, Israel has every right to defend itself, to go after these areas, but, there's the very unfortunate collateral damage, and every life is precious. But how do you defend yourself? How do you get at those weapons and to destroy them so that they can't hit your own civilians? It's really a rock and a hard place. And international law is really grappling with this right now. How do we even solve this in a gray zone era? I mean, the Geneva Conventions have a long history going back some 175 or so years. Rules of law have been updated really since the unification wars of Italy in the late 1850s into the 1860s, and it's been built steadily, but there have clearly been times of violation even up to the present. And how do you deal with a situation like this one that's really so complex and so technological as well? And Israel's denied involvement. That's the other side of it too. I think everyone will say Israel did it, but prove it.
Yeah, I guess you can't, can you? Wow. So how does this end? I mean, I find it difficult to figure out how this war will come to a conclusion.
I think this is where 2006 is instructive, to go back to the summer war that lasted for 34 days. Israel effectively hammered Hezbollah positions for several weeks and then was asked to conduct a ceasefire. The death toll was much higher on the Lebanese side than on the Israeli side, and it ended up being a fairly short war of attrition. I think both sides were certainly tired and they wanted an end to it, but as I noted, there were still just massive stockpiles on the Hezbollah side. And so my sense is that it will probably follow some of that trajectory. I don't know that Israel will conduct ground operations the way it did in Gaza. Certainly Israel had a significant presence on the ground in southern Lebanon for many years, and actually withdrew in the year 2000 and really doesn't want to be in that location. But it's hard to get inside the minds of Israeli leadership, because I think in the north of Israel, they're just so sick and tired of being hit month after month with mortars and rockets that they want some level of resolution. So I think Hezbollah's response in the coming days will speak to whether or not this lasts a longer time.
Wonderful. Thanks for your expertise and your insights on this. Again, our guest, Dr. Glenn Deurr. He's professor of international studies at Cedarville University. For more information about how to attend this Ohio school where you could study international studies if you wanted to, go to cedarville.edu. Again, cedarville.edu. Dr. Deurr, as always, we're grateful for you, my friend.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and have a great day, everyone.
Hey there. Thanks for joining us. Like you, we're looking for a different kind of conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video.